Good morning and welcome. Book Bans and Challenges on the Rise is our program this morning, a part of the 2022 Embrace Ideas Festival, so thank you for joining us. I'm Kristen Motti, a programs librarian here at the Central Library. Thank you to the Boston Book Festival and to the King Boston for collaborating on this event and bringing it here to the library. Before we begin, the BPL would like to acknowledge the land that we are on. We acknowledge that the Boston Public Library's Central Library stands on land that was once a water-based ecosystem providing sustenance for the indigenous Massachusetts people and is a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among nations. We are committed to land acknowledgements for all locations at which we operate. We reaffirm this commitment to set the context for our planning, deliberations, and public engagement, which will take place from the spirit of welcome and respect found in our motto, free to all. And this is taken from the institutional statement ratified by the Board of Trustees for the Boston Public Library on September 29th, 2020. Thank you. Before we begin, toward the end of today's discussion, when it's time for Q&A, we do have, just so everyone knows, we do have an in-person audience and we also have an online audience. So before we begin, we just want to go over how the Q&A portion will work. In-person attendees, would you please speak into the microphone when it is passed so that those online can hear you? And for those of you joining us online, please type your questions into the Q&A box in Zoom, and those questions will be shared out loud here in the room. Thank you. Now, here's just a little bit about each of today's panelists. Akunna Eneh is the Programs and Community Outreach Librarian for the Roxbury Branch of the Boston Public Library in Nubian Square. And Irza-Leggat is the Educational Marketing Manager at Candlewick Press. Dr. Laura M. Jiménez is currently the Associate Dean of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the Boston University Wheelock College of Education and Human Development. And Michael Bronski is an independent scholar, journalist, and writer who has been involved in social justice movements since the 1960s. He is a professor of the practice in activism and media studies in the studies of women, gender, and sexuality at Harvard University. So welcome to our panelists. Thank you all for being here, whether you're here online, in person, or are watching the video later. We hope you enjoy the program. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you.
Thanks for that introduction. We're going to use a mic, especially for the folks online. It's easier for you to hear. And for the folks way in the back of the room, I want to hear, no, we're not doing that. But I wanted to let you know that we're going to be using a mic today. Yeah, my name is Dr. Laura Jiménez. I usually try to use the doctor because I earned that. And it's important. I also want to add to the land acknowledgement. I think it's important that we not only acknowledge the land that we sit on, the land that we're using, but we also acknowledge the fact that our country is built on the enslaved labor of Africans and indigenous communities. And I, right, as a white presenting Latina, I profit from that every single day. And I try very hard to raise up and include and, I don't know, fight seems, I don't like fight anymore. I feel like we don't need any more fighting. But I try to disrupt those systems that are present and ingrained and ongoing. So the four of us are going to talk today a bit about banned books and what it means in library and education, and or excuse me, libraries, not just the one. And so I'm going to start by asking some questions, and we're going to hopefully have a rousing conversation. As if you noticed watching beforehand, Michael and I are already talking about egghead stuff, so this is going to be good. So let's just start off. Right? When we talk about banning and challenging books, I want to hear from librarians first. What does that mean? Like when we talk about banned, challenged, right? How does that work in municipalities, in localities, in schools, and in public libraries? What effect does it have on sales, right? All that sort of stuff. So if you could give us a good thumbnail of the whole banned book thing.
Okay. Hi, I'll Hello. Okay, hi. The whole thing. So, well, in general, there's like banning books, taking it off the shelves, I guess, in the library sense. And then challenges, which are probably more frequent, which is just kind of like concern being raised amongst a group or from an individual. And different systems, different library systems will have ways in which patrons or library users can say, I want to challenge this book. So like the BPL has on its website under the collection development policy and procedures, they have a form where you can actually say something about a book. You can also talk to your local librarian. You can bring your neighbors to the library and talk about a book. And I think that is something that you should do if you're concerned, because it is a library that belongs to you. So I think it might be important to say too that public libraries versus school libraries, school libraries have an obligation to meet the curriculum, and public libraries aren't obligated to meet a curriculum. So there might be different parameters in terms of what someone could raise about a book being appropriate or not appropriate for school or public library. I hope I did that some justice.
How is this affecting booksellers?
So one of the things that sometimes people assume or even sort of laud is, oh, a book challenge is great. You get all this publicity for your book. Now you're going to really sell like tons and tons of books. And sometimes that is true. A book that like we have, a book called Beyond Magenta, which is a collection of stories about transgender teens and their transitions or their choices in that, as they develop, has been far and away one of the most banned or challenged books this year, and we are currently out of stock, anxiously awaiting books to return to refill the warehouse. But the other side of it is, because that book has gotten all this attention, that's a good example of a book that lots of librarians now know and are sort of like, I'm going to steer clear of that book, and not only am I going to steer clear of that book, but I'm going to steer clear of books about other issues that are around transgender. Like, I see this is creating a community, the stress in my community or in like communities. And so they definitely, there can be a way that book sales increase, but I think in the big picture, book sales are reduced by the fact that a book is challenged and gets that kind of news.
Is this working? Yeah, I think that it. I mean, people have always said this for years, right? That if particularly, they would say it about movie stars, that if somebody dies, they become more popular. Yeah. But they're dead, right? And if a book is challenged or banned, right, you may see an uptick in sales, yeah. But overall, I mean, I think any challenge that doesn't lead to productive discussion, which they could. But any challenge and any ban is just overall bad. Right. I mean, it's bad for libraries, it's bad for students, it's bad for readers, and it's bad for the industry too. Right.
And actually, hold on, I'm going to just add another thing that, like, and so as Akunna mentioned, like in school libraries, where a lot of times what will happen is a book will be challenged by parents who say, it's not that this book is inappropriate, but it's inappropriate for my child's, or the grade level that's in this school. So Beyond Magenta is actually, once again, an example of a book that a parent challenged. The school system addressed it by saying it is inappropriate for kids for the middle school, even though it's probably appropriate for the 8th graders, but we're taking out of the middle school because of 6th and 7th. We're going to keep them at the high school level. So, that sort of thing, as the librarian who contacted me about that sort of said, like, I think they're not recognizing that 8th graders are in our school and need this book. Maybe 6th graders don't need it as much. I'm sure some 6th graders do. Another book that I'll just, that probably is our most frequently, longest standing challenge book is the book It's Perfectly Normal. And it's a book about growing up, developing sexual health. It's got a very long subtitle, now even longer because we added the word gender to it. But that's a book where we describe it as for ages 10 and up, and a lot of times people think, I don't think that my 7-year-old should be able to find this in the school library. That said, like, there's probably more than one story, but there is at least one story that was covered by the Philadelphia Inquirer of a 10-year-old taking it out of the public library and telling her mother, this is happening to me. It covers sexual abuse, and her father was molesting her. Because of this book, she was able to like tell her mother what was happening, and then he went to jail. So, and and then in the court case, the judge said, the hero in the story is this child for coming forward, but also the book for giving her the language and making her aware of what was wrong. And so I do think like it's easy to think, oh, my 5th grader doesn't know this, but like some 5th grader does need to know this, and you hope your 5th grader doesn't.
Right. And many more 5th graders know it than
Yeah.
people want to imagine.
That's true too.
Right.
I think one of the things we also need to address is this idea of soft censorship, and that's huge in education. Again, I teach in a college of education. The idea of soft censorship is, as you were talking about, Anne, is this idea like, ooh, it might be a problem,
Yeah.
so I'm going to avoid it, right? It might cause an issue, so I'm going to avoid it, right? I think that is a nefarious path that we are on, because it doesn't invite those conversations, right? It doesn't invite the communities. It doesn't invite the students, it doesn't invite the teachers, it does not invite any kind of conversation around either the issue, the book, or having kids be able to do that work, right? I really, really worry about soft censorship in the classrooms, right? More than in libraries. I fear it. I think I also wanted to add one of the things, because public libraries are run so differently than school libraries. There's a case in Chicago a couple of years ago, probably 10 years ago now, that's Persepolis was challenged. Okay, it's a great book. And actually the publishers were super smart, and they took a large book and they split it in half in a pretty good place. So the first part is about her growing up in Iran, right, and her experience as a child of the revolution, right? And then they split it just as at the end point. She's a young woman, she's in the airport, she's heading to France, right? And that's where they split the book. And even though, and the second part of the book is very much YA adult content, I totally get that. But they banned the entire book, right? And so what they ended up doing is taking that book out of all classrooms, and so classroom libraries, in other words, libraries that teachers built, and school libraries. And in Chicago at that time, I don't know if it's still the case, I believe the school libraries were connected to the municipal libraries. They had a reciprocal relationship. So that sucker got pulled out of everywhere, right? And so banning is complicated, and it's not a one-off. It's incredibly complex. I also, hold on, how about soft censorship that you all have seen, especially in the university?
Right. I mean, I think that, so I want to say, soft censorship doesn't only happen in the classroom, right, or in the public or the school libraries, right? I mean, because in the more macro sense, right, so books are published by something called the publishing industry, and they're an industry, and people think about profit, I mean, understandably.
Yes.
Right, and and on some level, that has to be taken into consideration. People have to think about what ban. Now, I'm not going to say that Random House will not publish a book because I think it might be banned, right? But in my own experience, so I published with several books with Beacon Press, and I wrote a book in 2011 called Queer History of the United States, and then I did in consulting with actually a children's book writer because I didn't know what I was doing. We did a YA edition, and it was totally rewritten, and we were told by the people who distribute Beacon at Random House that I couldn't have any sexual references in the first 30 to 40 pages, because that's what people looked at when they were buying the book for school libraries. After 40 pages, I could have sex. So I had a passing reference to, I went to a gay liberation front meeting and I was hoping to find a boyfriend that had been cut. I went there to make friends, right? Stonewall became a club, not a bar, right? And no people. My editor at Beacon said, "This, this is stupid," but these people know what they're doing in terms of sales, right? But after that, we had, page 180. I had teenagers having sex with men in restrooms, and that was fine, right? So I think that when you're looking at soft censorship, it happens in all kinds of ways, and it happens. I mean, I think one thing to remember, right, to keep in mind is that the best form of censorship is the author internalizing that he or they cannot write the book, right? That's really effective because the book never even gets imagined, or it never goes from the head to the keyboard. But it happens in the industry all the time, and we don't know because it happens. I mean, unless I said this now, nobody really know it. And it also happens on marketing, right? So a book can come out, but the way it's marketed might be a little bit misleading because they don't want to actually give clues to what's in the book, depending on what they're aiming, who their target audience is. Again, not soft censorship, but certainly sleight of hand, misdirection. But I had a question, and I really don't know the answer to this. In a public library like we're in, or like you work in, can a child take in a book from the adult section? Yes, they can. All right. That's great.
What's that?
That's terrific. I'm glad.
So Michael mentioned this idea of the marketing aspect of this and the editorial choices that get made, and you were nodding your head. So I'd really like you to address some of that.
Well, I mean, I sometimes hesitate to I'm going to say something and be like, oh, I shouldn't have said it like that. But I mean, it is true. I specifically work in the educational side of the marketing department, and so there are books that I look at and we think that there's no way that's going to be taught in a school. And sometimes it's like there's no way. It's way too light. There's not going to be, and that's more for our older books, Amy Green's Summer Vacation, probably not going to might get into a high school library, because it might be something that they assume kids were going to read, might be interested in reading, but isn't going to necessarily going to be a book that somebody wants to teach in their classroom. But then and a lot of times I'll suggest that a book with religious content is probably not going to be taught in schools. That is very much my Massachusetts sensibility. I am usually told, that's not really a problem in a lot of part of the country. That will be fine. And I don't sell specifically to the companies, but the woman I work with who does, she definitely goes through books and sort of says there is too much sex in this book for it to be a classroom book in a middle school or a high school, or there's drug use, or there's swearing, or there's suicide, or these are various triggers that people want to know about. So teachers want to know about, and that so there are books that she will say present to a curriculum company that is the one who are really selling to the schools, saying this book you may not have much call for because of these reasons. But then there are books there's a book we published about seahorses called Seahorse, the Shyest Fish in the Sea. And it is all about how seahorses live, and you learn a lot about seahorses. Great book, beautiful woodcut illustrations. But there are 2 pages where they show how seahorses' babies come together, sort of. I mean, you see seahorses' tails touching. It's woodcuts. But the text for it says what is happening, and that has been picked up in a big curriculum company. It's sold into a lot of schools, and yet in a school in Tennessee, they have determined that the book cannot be read in their school. Well, the book can be read, but pages, I think, 21 and 22 cannot be read, or 2 pages are, they actually contacted Candlewick about printing a book version without those 2 pages in it, which I am proud to say we said, no, we can't do that. But you don't have to read those book pages, and that's, again, what happens. So.
I just wanted to add too about this because I'm kind of learning. I didn't know that about Persepolis, that that's why they split it into. I was like, wow, they're making more money by splitting it into. but now I know. So that's interesting. But I think that that means that one thing that soft censorship will do is it'll affect the profession, especially the library profession, because we all don't read all the books, despite what people might think. But we rely on our experiences with literature, with book reviews, and reading books, and our discussion with each other to be able to curate what goes into the library. So if there's a sense that we're not going to touch this book because of what it might generate from the public, we don't have a conversation about it. And it's already very hard to just have conversation anyway, given that we're in a big system. So how do we diversify? How do we be inclusive if we're not seeing these things, or people don't feel like they can bring up that I've read this book, but I think people will not like it, you know? So that's just occurring to me as you guys are talking.
I think it's important, and I also, The Shy, if anybody has a chance, The Shyest Fish in the Sea is a fabulous book, and it's not only been banned in Tennessee, it's also made that dude, the Krauss list.
Yeah,
it made the Krauss list, and I think it was also on the York list, which is the sort of the grandfather of the Krauss list. One of the problems, I'm going to use scare quotes here, is that it does show male seahorses giving birth. So it's being banned for gender confusion.
Okay.
It's a fact. It's being banned for a fact. Right? I really want to make that clear. It is a nonfiction book that shows how seahorses live and their mating, it looked pretty tame to me. Maybe if I was a seahorse, I would have gotten a little feisty. And then they deposit the little eggs in the dude's pooch, his pouch, in his, right? And then they get expelled in this sort of cloud of baby seahorses. It's the cutest damn thing.
I know.
Right? And it's fact. Right? I want to talk about how history, how histories, how facts are getting challenged and banned. This isn't opinion. This isn't necessarily like an opinion. I am not a fan of pizza. That is an opinion. Pizza should not be served anywhere would be a ban on that food group, right? I don't really know any facts about pizza, so I probably should have thought of this before, but perhaps there are some pizza facts that online might throw out there. But pizza has dough, cheese, and sauce in America. That's a fact. Are we going to ban it because that's a fact? Like, how do we distinguish, right, that we are editing out factual things of the world? We're editing out history, right, and people and experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I know this could be sort of a tangent, but I think one of the things that has become more clear, and why there are probably so many more bans and challenges. One, I think, why have such happened this year? It is partly because of the Krauss list. It is partly because politically people have recognized this is a way to aggravate and incite their own base. But it also is that the issues of gender have become a much bigger conversation that our whole country is having. Kids, high school kids are deciding they want to be they don't want to be he or she. And that conversation is something that we didn't have when I was a kid, or when I was in high school, that wasn't a conversation. And so those of us who are now parenting high school students are sort of like, this isn't even a conversation I can call back. What did mom say? I don't know. She didn't have to talk about that. Like, so I think, and I mean, the Don't Say Gay bill that is down in Florida, like that, it's interesting. I'm not, seahorses is the problem appears in Tennessee, but I'm sort of confident it's also a problem in Florida and places, that they don't even want to have this conversation. They don't want kids having a conversation about gender, lest it kind of veer towards another bigger conversation that they don't want to have. And I think one of the most fascinating facts about seahorses is like, it's really the only male sea animal that does do this. Like, it is always sort of a fascinating, like, wait, how the father gives birth? That's so unusual. So like, why wouldn't that be something a teacher would be excited to share with their student? And it shouldn't necessarily mean like, it's gonna open a whole can of worms. Not necessarily, it's fact, like, so.
Right. I mean, I think the other thing that I completely agree about the facts, I think it's complicated by the notion that we, in some macro way, that the country can no longer agree on what a fact is, right? And that, I mean, to go back to the really, really horrible Kellyanne Conway coming up with the phrase alternative facts, right? So that you would think if it's a scientifically demonstrated through a control group fact, it would be useful to have it out in the world, except people cannot agree on that. You know, people cannot agree on the most basic polling information. People cannot agree on, you know, the question is, asking a nominee for the Supreme Court if she can define what a woman is, and she had the great answer, right? I'm not a biologist. It's out of my ken, right? But if we can, so let me step back for a minute. If we think about this as a series of gatekeepers, and including gatekeepers meaning reviewers as well, and I think, you know, Kirkus and PW, Publishers Weekly, and the Hornbook do a great job. But there are all kinds of other review-based gatekeepers that combined with, and now gatekeepers are actually city councils, school boards, state governments, possibly the federal government on some level at some point. We don't know. You know, if there are gatekeepers and we can't agree on facts, it's going to be a major problem. Right, and also there's a notion of reading a book and interpreting it. So I just came across this case in 1956, I believe in Mississippi, there was a book banned in all the all the school libraries called The Bunny's Wedding, because this is a year before Loving v. Virginia, because a white bunny was marrying a brown bunny, right? And I'm sure the author probably had no intention of actually interracial marriage. It was simply bunnies, and the reading of that fact caused it to be banned.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, I actually, when you asked that question, I thought about the 1619 project. Yeah. Because that's, what's interesting with that example is, I think, you know, to what you were saying about what do we think facts are, there are people who want to argue that it's not a fact that Africans were here before there was institutionalized slavery. They want to say that there's some origin story of the United States that's perfect and infallible, and some mistakes along the way that we've corrected or something like this. And how dare somebody challenge that? So it's interesting because, like with the seahorse example, it's like you can see in nature that this is true. But this is something that politically and socially is being sort of tucked away or denied. So for the furtherment of some political agenda, right? And then there comes the sort of controversy of what is the fact, you know, what is true. And yeah, that's tricky, but I also feel like as a librarian, I want to have the things that are based on facts. And I want to be critical about like who says what is a fact as well, and why. So that's, I don't know, it's like the definitive things we can say, And also, we have to kind of acknowledge that people, that the racism, sexism, all the oppressive ideas in our society really affect how people see facts and understand facts.
I think you make an excellent point that with history and narratives and story, I think fact may not be the right word, may not be the right way to think about it. But there are always points of view and perceptions of events. I think in our country, in the United States, the point of view and perception has always been heavily weighted to, as you say, right, the idealized version of this country, right? And the idealized version of this country is white, male, cis, able, land owning, Christian, straight, English speaking, right? I think those are them, right? That's the idealized notion of our country. And when we have literature and media that challenges that idealized notion, right? Simply by existing, simply by being, simply by showing there is another perception, there's another reality, there's a different truth to that event, like this idea of Stonewall being a club? No, a club. Do you mean like a boys and girls club? Like a club. I'm reeling from this. So if you don't know Stonewall, Stonewall was a bar, right? And it was in a very seedy, yeah, it was a seedy bar in a, in the area on Christopher Street. Right across the street was actually, I believe it was a prison or a holding facility for women that were incarcerated in New York County, I think, right? It was not a great part of the city, right? And the Stonewall uprising was a riot, right? Precipitated by and led by, right, trans women of color and butch women, right? So those are the folks that we should be seeing their stories, and those are exactly the stories we are not seeing. And when we do see even the hint or the beginning of it, those are the books that get banned quickly and challenged quickly. I wanted to sort of switch gears a little bit and talk about who's getting banned and why. So we've talked a little bit about gender, right? And you mentioned race, that is 1619, there it is. The 1619 Project, right? Race is always a big one. What are some other books that are popular to get banned? What are you likely to get banned if you're covering?
So you keep thinking out. I mean, I obviously, I'm particularly aware of the books that are Candlewick books that are banned. So another book that got banned was Yaki Delgado Wants to Kick Your Ass. So that book, right on the cover, and the author Meg Medina was like, maybe we shouldn't use that as the cover line, and her editor was like, no, that's exactly the title, what the title should be. But yes, of course, there are definitely people who are unenthusiastic about having a book right out in front of their high school students that has the word ass in it. Meg was invited to speak someplace, but told, please don't, we're not gonna have that book there. And she ended up declining the invitation, but she is featured, we have a book called You Can't Say That, which is interviews with a large, about 10 or 12 authors who have all been banned for different reasons. They're not all Candlewick authors, but Meg Medina is one of them. And I think, basically kind of coarse language is looked at as something that people are quickly flag. But the other story, which Meg thinks in many ways was the real story, was the story about a Hispanic girl growing up and being bullied by somebody else who was also Hispanic, and what was that story? And she feels like those are stories that a lot of times, if you're Latinx, your story is less likely to be something that the school wants to put front and center.
that, I mean, I'm going to speak as this sort of, as a professor, but there are all kinds of stories. So I teach classes about U.S. politics in some way, right? And I taught a class last semester called Power to the People, Black Power, Radical Feminism, and Gay Liberation. And we read Soul on Ice by Eldridge Cleaver. And I, and it, in many ways, it's a pretty repulsive story on his part, because he was a criminal. I mean, he was a rapist, and he sort of glories in it for part of the book, right? And I actually had a student come up and ask that I not assign it this year because it was too hard. And these are Harvard students who presumably come from a pretty well-read background. And two of the students said that they felt that it was giving a bad impression of African Americans during the 60s, even though at the end of the book he actually recants, and we have endless class discussions about how this fits into an array of things, right? So I do think that when we're looking at whose story gets to be told, that there are endless complications within those, that it's great to have all positive stories, and it's also great to have complicated stories. There's a feminist writer, Dodie Bellamy, years ago said that she'd rather see complicated portraits of women in literature rather than positive ones, because complicated ones would ultimately be positive. So I do think when we're looking at readers' reactions, particularly in classrooms or in like libraries with people making complaints, right, that it's also important to look at how complex the situation is as well.
To add to the list, maybe I'm thinking of photography books with nudity in it, especially ones that are sort of depicting like the Black male or are about the LGBT experience and sexuality, which people should talk about way more anyway. But yeah, you do find parents who will bring that up to the circ desk and be like, why is this on the shelf? And it's in the adult area, It's not laying out in the kids area for kids to see. But I also believe if kids want to look at that, they should, and they should have access to it. That was just adding another layer to things that are censored sometimes.
Right, and I think that's so important, because, especially like you're talking about, photography books, especially about Black males, right? So, a lot of the fear-mongering right now about critical race theory and teaching critical race theory in schools. First of all, we're not. I wish we would. Whatever, right? But when we talk about critical race theory, that is definitely, race is front and center, right? And because that's what the theory is about, right? And if you look at Kimberly Crenshaw's intersectionality, right, and her idea of intersectionality in the law, and it's been taken up in education, she points out that marginalization is cumulative. So, right, you've got, especially like queer, Black, and trans, right? You've got queer, that's one step off. Black, that's another. Trans, that's queer, Black, and trans. Those are the most vulnerable people in our society right now. Period. End of sentence. I'm not going to argue. And when we have characters that have a history of being portrayed in negative ways, okay? So this is where I think Michael and I, we're going to have an academic tussle. Get ready for it. Okay, this is what it's going to look like. When we have a predominance of characters that are marginalized and they're portrayed in these negative ways, that adds to and becomes part of the accepted social norm of those people, right? So Latina lesbians, okay, we're not portrayed anyway. So let's just, so Latinas, we get the Madonna whore, right? We are either cleaners, we have hot tempers, we are mothers, right? Lesbians, we are in media to die, right? Or to become incarcerated, or to go into forced marriages, or institutionalized and then in a forced marriage and then die. I mean, this is what we are in media, right? And so when you have stories that simply reify that, right? I don't care how complex it is. We don't need it. We're all good on those stories. I would love to see, I don't know, let's say 10 years of books that only represent Black men as whole beings with complex ideas and emotions that do more than just serve at the behest of making white people better. I would love to see 10 years of books where no queer characters die, just no more deaths, no more incarcerations, no more, just none. We just now I can't do that because I'm not in charge of things, and that's probably good. It's probably good. But I think we could use a moratorium on tales being told by outsiders about our experiences. Now that's very controversial. Okay, so I'm talking about what is often referred to as own voices, meaning, right, and that's Corinne Duvaus. I don't know how to pronounce her last name. She threw it out on Twitter and she said, that's a story by and about a marginalized community. All right, I'd love to say, if you are writing a story about a marginalized community, you have to be from that marginalized community. For a while, we need time to tip scales the other way.
Actually, I think one thing that fits this is I had an experience earlier or late last year where some of the books that we get at the library, I am not the specific librarian choosing it. Someone else has chosen it to come to my branch. And one of the books that was chosen was a book that was specifically about the Muslim community in my neighborhood. So it didn't name it that way, but it's talking about the mosque and cultural center that they use. And we had 2 books in the whole system of this title, and one, for some reason, was living at my branch. So I kind of was like, can we please talk about this? Because I felt like, well, as you're saying, I don't like the idea of there being a story about a community that this person is not of. And not only that, but they're super critical and putting out things that they say are facts that when you go look at it, they're not facts, and they're all things that have been disputed or are questioned. So there were many reasons to not want this book on my shelf, but the main one to me was I thought it would restrict access in terms of the Muslim community coming in, seeing that, and being like, no, thank you. I don't have any place in this library. So I do, it is tricky, but I do kind of lean your way. I'm often kind of like, yeah, let's just, for a while, let's do this because we need to hear from Muslim people, we need to hear from trans people, we need to hear from more Black people. And I just want to say, I think that we're even having this discussion because these are the people who said, I'm not going to shut up, I'm not going to not write about myself or not portray myself, I'm going to do it. And I'm going to fight for my rights on the streets. And so publishers, libraries, all of us, we've had to respond to that. So the more that we fight that, the more we're going to get people saying, no, I want to be heard, and I think we should listen.
I totally agree, and I would love to see a moratorium on any number of things over the next 10 years, right? The alternative to actually a moratorium would be banning things, right? Would be to actually just publish much more of like positive things. Right. But it actually raises the interesting question. I mean, despite the fact that this book was filled with mistakes or filled with not factual material or questionable material, right? You know, I mean, a lot of what I teach is history, right? So at what point, and you know, when faced with this question about the Eldridge Cleaver book, right? It's an important historical book. It actually is in conversation with the Black Panther Party, with many other, it's in conversation with James Baldwin. It's in conversation with Elaine Brown, with Angela Davis. But I think that there's a tendency, not from you, Laura, but a tendency to really prioritize in a perhaps not as sensitive way as possible the notion of positive images, and which then avoids. I mean, surprisingly, not all gay men are that nice. I know a bunch of really not very nice lesbians. There's in fact, 2 were over for dinner the other night. Right. But it's important to actually present some sort of complexity, particularly in a historical way as well. And I could easily see the book like Soul on Ice, people objecting because because it looked bad for black people, and people objecting because they were white and they didn't want books on black people. So it's really hard to sort of thread this. I hate this metaphor. Thread this needle. And I think the best we can hope for is endless conversations moving forward, right? So I'm just curious, was the book deprioritized in the library, or?
No, so,
Yeah.
just at my branch, I asked that it not be at our branch, and it's available in the library overall, but not where we are, because I felt like it would restrict the population there from actually using the library.
Yeah, well, like the own voices question is something that has sort of been part of, Candlewick was definitely eager to work more. We absolutely, our editors do make efforts to be certain that they are, authors are telling their story. But without doubt, there are occasions when somebody else is telling the story, and sometimes that is a sense of this is a book that's a beautiful story, it's a beautiful book, and I would say it's never a factual book. We wouldn't say that, I mean, that's not totally true. A great trilogy about several different eras of Black experience in the United States was written by Doreen Rappaport, a Jewish white woman who's sort of bona fides and as being a historian are good. And I remember actually being at an event once with Carol Boston Weatherford and Doreen talking on the same program, and I turned to Carol, I was like, how do you feel about that? She's like, oh, she's fine. So, I mean, it is good, when I get the okay from Carol that, she's fine, but not everybody is, that doesn't necessarily count. And so without a doubt, it is important that the Own Voices keeps growing. And I also follow what you're saying that, the important thing is all the stories are told. And I think of this podcast I heard recently about a teen book group that was reading nothing but banned books from their area. And one of the great parts of the story was since the books were all banned, they had no access to them, but they created a wish list and on Amazon, and it was filled the next day. So many people eager to make sure they had them in their hands. But they said one of the speakers was talking about kind of what you were saying, Laura, that our parents, our schools seem to want us to think that the only experience is the straight white experience. And we need to we're growing, we're people, we need to know about a lot of different people. We need to know there's more, that the world is a wider experience than just what we see around us. And so we want to read those books. And sometimes those books aren't written by their own voice, I would say.
Right. And again, thank God I'm not in charge of things. Okay. I don't want to be in charge of things. Right. I just think we have to have that on our plate. We have to start giving priority, which means in education, we have a problem with privileged folk not being able to do the work of cross-cultural reading. So what I mean by that is, let's take Yaqui Delgado, one of my favorite books, and I do tend to teach it because I love it. And I have had a lot of white, especially, I teach at Boston University, predominantly white institution. I've had a lot of white students that have a hard time getting into the book. And it's not because it's not well written, it's because they don't have the cultural capital to understand that experience, to understand and get into that. That is a muscle, that is a way of reading that marginalized people right? We grow up, we literally develop that. Like, so I was watching, so listen, I was never not a lesbian, okay? My mom jokes that I hit on the nurses when I was born, right? So I don't really have a very good coming out story, right? I just, if you want to share that, I'm not your gal, right? And so I had to learn to see romance, right? And I did it by, like, I would imagine I'm this one or I'm that character. I want to, you know, I would approach that character. I had to do that work of reading cross-culturally, right? As a white presenting Latina, right, my family was not represented in any of the books. I had to do the work of cross-cultural reading into spaces. Grace Lynn talks about it, how she did it in such an effective way. She did not depict Asian characters until she was well into her adulthood, right? It's not great that we have to do this, but it is a skill. I teach white students, straight students, how to do the work of reading cross-culturally. And it's something I wish we could figure out how to teach K to 12 students. It's something we all need to be able to do, to be critical readers, to have conversations about what we're seeing and how it represents and what those representations and how we're interpreting them and what it means, because that interpretation piece is not about fact, right? So here's what I want to do. I want to make sure that we have time for questions. Do we have questions? Can we start them up? Great. Okay, so and unless people have like last things that came up. Okay. If we've got some questions, that'd be fabulous. Looks like let's go online first.
So reading this verbatim, what are your thoughts about libraries' responsibilities to stock or not stock books being published today that push disinformation, misinformation narratives? For example, books that falsely position themselves as scientific, contrary to actual scientific consensus, that supports the idea of the 2020 election was fraudulent, et cetera. And so you did touch a little bit on this, but maybe you can expand on that a little bit more.
I would say that this is definitely a conversation in the library world. There's discussion always about intellectual freedom and whatnot, but I think people are rightly trying to complicate that and say who's saying what and what are they saying. So the content still does matter. We have to kind of read into what are people saying, and I personally don't think it makes sense to acquire books that are misrepresenting facts or, yeah, I'll just put it like that, misrepresenting facts. At the same time, there are books that are culturally relevant that I personally am not like, I'm going to this book for some information, but there's a feeling that this book does the job of telling the truth about our people. And so that's another instance where I'm like, again, I have to read it and I have to kind of sometimes learn about something that I don't experience. I want to say a title, but I don't want to. I don't want to be too specific, or maybe I should be specific. It's the one about Lynch, Mr. Lynch. People often come to the Roxbury Library and say, "Behold the pale white horse," I should say. That's the book. It's interesting. It's interesting. The theory is very interesting. I don't follow it, but it does. The book has an historical document in it. That's not fake, but the person's interpretation of what that means, there are folks who glom onto that and some folks who don't. I think it's important to have that beside all these other things that are out there that we can kind of, that one can compare, one can, I think that that's the best that we can do. But these books that are sort of like misrepresenting this biology of trans people, I don't think that that does us a service at all. And so we need to be critical. The conversation is always the most important thing to me.
Right. And I do think there are probably ways, and you probably know them much better than I do since you're in the business, I'm in a different business, right, of how to, a book coming out from a small, highly conservative or right-wing publishing company is probably not going to go through the same sort of general peer review as a book that may be controversial coming out from Random House or Farrar, Straus and Giroux, right? So that there are levels of accountability within the industry. I suspect the one from the small company may be more propaganda, and even if we may not, I'm thinking particularly of a book that's been a horrible book that's been totally. The people argue with the Bell Curve by Charles Murray, right? Charles Murray? Yeah, that's Charles Murray, right? That equates IQ tests and race. Quite famous and should probably be in every library that wants to carry it because it actually is an important historical and cultural document, even if you want to, particularly if you want to disagree with it. But different than a book coming out from. Forget the name of the small company in Washington, Regency. It's a conservative publishing house, and they just, I wouldn't trust anything that they publish in terms of its factualness. So there probably are ways to determine this, but it means going over every book.
I think it's also important to think about resource, right? So libraries are not an infinite resource. Y'all have to do weeding. You have to look at, right, what things get checked out when they don't, right? So there's a whole library, it's called library science, right? And it's called library science for a reason, right? So there's not infinite space in a library. And so they do have to make choices about what makes the cut, what is shelved, what is not, what is stored, how it's accessed, right? I think school libraries and curriculum is another space. I think in that way, the motivation, the impetus is a little different, right? Library science is about getting books in hands, right? It's about getting people reading and thinking and engaged with the literature. Education is a little different. Education is about growth. Education is about skills and mindsets and growth. And so I worry about uncritically welcoming in just patented falsehoods, right? I think we have to be very careful about that. So that's just, again, it's just a different way that our fields, they intersect, but they're a little different.
Add real quick, I think also we just need to be honest that in libraries we curate, and we curate to particular purposes. We don't just warehouse things. And so if we're honest with ourselves about that, we can talk honestly about the content.
So we do have a few more questions online, but do we have a question in person? No? Okay. What do you feel are the best ways to navigate the upswing in parents' rights arguments versus minors' access to objectionable books in the library? And then there's a second part to this, which is when parents are now objecting on the broadest grounds that their kids can merely see books on display that their parents don't like.
So I think all of you probably have an opinion. I think we all have an opinion on this one. But and to some degree, I think the line that always comes back is, you are welcome to decide what your child can read, but you are not welcome to decide what my child can read. And I feel like the parents' rights groups that have the attitude that because of one child or because I'm the parent, I get to decide what books are appropriate, are not the parents that are going through School Library Journal, reading Hornbook reviews, and finding out whether or not this book has won awards, what's the backstory to this book, and what it's being used for in their child's school. And if they are doing those things and they come to the librarian and ask about it, I think the librarian is usually well versed in explaining why a book is being used. And again, most school libraries do have in place a system for, you know what, if you don't want him to read this, he won't. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to have it for every other child in the school.
I feel like I'm talking too much, I'm sorry. But I think that Laura was right to make a distinction between schools and the public libraries, because there might be a different context. I just feel like in general, I don't want to tell parents they can't, like you were saying, I don't think we should tell parents they can't be the person in charge of their own children. But in a public library, we do want all the people who exist in this society, which is actually a diverse set of people, to come to see themselves, to see the information that they need and that they want. And if the thing you're asking for contradicts that, then I would have to say I don't agree with that. No, my parents, they didn't grow up here, so they didn't know about things like Hornbook and school library journal and stuff like that. So if they were to object to something, I think that it would be great to have the teachers, librarians take the time to actually read the book with them and be open to what the parent might be objecting to. I just, again, the conversation is really important. We should take the time to do that and not dismiss the parent too much.
I have a really big thing to say that may not even be particularly useful for the panel, but that at the basis of this is the problem of not just parents, but adults feeling they need to protect children. And for the most part, children are far more sophisticated and understanding and open and are hungry and thirsty for knowledge, right? And if a parent objects to it, I know when I was 14 or 15, I actually worked in the town public library for like 8 years, beginning as a page and working myself up to, it was a small library, so I got to do lots of different things, right? But my parents discovered that I had brought home a copy of John Ritchie's novel, City of Night, which is about gay male hustlers in Los Angeles, which I thought was absolutely fascinating, and wanted to move to Los Angeles after reading it, right? And they told me I shouldn't be reading it, right? And they didn't go to the library. But they were, by their own standards, good gatekeepers. I think they knew I was gay anyway, so not a surprise, right? So I think that this notion about protecting children, of course, parents need to not leave razor blades on the kitchen table and everything else, right? But there is a pervasive, and we see it with Don't Say Gay, we see it with the notion of grooming, we see it with, complaining about Disneyland being groomers, which is, they are groomers, but towards consumerism, not about sexuality. They're horrible groomers, but, but so I think that underlying all of this is this notion about sort of protectionism. And the other, I just discovered this the other day, and then I'll stop. There's a group called Catholic Vote in America. It's a conservative group of ostensibly old Catholics. I have no idea, right? And they've launched a campaign in June called Hide the Pride, in which they're urging, and I have no idea whether these are 50 people or hundreds of thousands, right? To actually go to the public libraries and check out all the books on the Pride shelf, and keep them out for a month, and then renew them. So it's Hide the Pride, right? And to bring your friends to take out the other books that how many books can people take out of the library now? 75, right. Yeah, but to have friends do it as well. So that's another gatekeeping technique.
I always think of this from the other side, right? So folks want to protect from, how did they term it? Inappropriate? I'm using scare quotes for everything here. Was it
Objectionable.
so they want to protect children from objectionable. That's an odd thing. That's an odd idea. Because what is objectionable, right? My partner and I have 2 sons. One is white and one is Latino. And we had talks about reproduction because one of them is my partner's birth child, and he wanted to know how that all worked. And we're like, all right, let's go, at a very young age, because we didn't just accidentally fall in a vat of sperm, right? That didn't happen. There was some science behind it, right? And our other son, right, he's indigenous. He looks, right, he's very dark-skinned. He's the kid that's gonna get harassed in a CVS. He's the kid that's gonna get pulled over by the cops. Right? So I knew that we had to have the talk about how to act, how to be, how to protect himself, the friends that he could hang out with. And we had to have that talk with his brother as well, right? So we have one white kid. He can get away with stuff that his brother can't do. I find that incredibly objectionable. I find that obscene that we have to do that, and we had to do that at a very young age, right? So I'm not sure what adults want to protect their children from. I will say this. Reading something in a book has never meant doing that thing. I've read a lot of things in books that I have never done. I've read about having sex with a man in a book. I have never done that. I've read about being a psycho killer in a book. I've never done that. I've read about making, incredibly complicated desserts in a book. I've never gotten past souffle because I do not have the patience. I am not going to fold my dough with butter, but I can read about it.
Yeah, actually, I want to go back to sort of the conversation. This was actually something that Lois Lowry talked about at one point when she received a letter from a father who objected to a book that had the word fuck in it. And he said, my daughter's reading this book and she comes across this and she shows it to me and I'm so upset about it. And Lois responded by saying, this is amazing that your daughter is bringing this to you and you're having that conversation. Like, this is the best way for you to have that conversation. She's probably going to hear that word somewhere else, and she might not bring it up with you. But in a book, it gives her the opportunity to do that. And back to what you said about having conversations. And I don't want to really totally tangent because I want to hear the next question, but I will say sometimes I worry about the parents' rights groups as partly being really dismissive of the expertise of teachers and librarians. And I feel like it is incredibly important that we continue to support teachers and librarians for the education and expertise that they have and not second guess it.
Also, I think it's important to acknowledge that the phrase parents' rights, which has been around, beginning with, so next year will be 100 years since the Scopes trial, the famous monkey trial, where they banned books on reproduction, on evolution, right? And we're still not teaching, we're now teaching evolution along with creationism in many schools, so we've actually not won this battle. But also parental rights is often a code word for a whole host of other deeply conservative repressive measures, right? It's not really about parents' rights, it's really about control.
Thank you. To dovetail on that, a question came in. How did libraries and educators respond to the idea that the practice of curation is an example of pushing an agenda?
Okay, all right. It is, and I'm okay with that. Education and libraries, as part of an educational system, have always been part of pushing an agenda. Our society pushes an agenda. The agenda is again, this idealized white, straight, cis, male, hetero, straight, hetero, Christian, landowning, English-speaking. Did I miss one? I think I got them all, right? Pushing that as an idealized, that's what everybody should shoot for. That's what everybody should, that's what everybody should go for. That is the idealized champion, you know, big brass ring, right? Yes, we've got an agenda, right? I have lots of agendas. I have a gay agenda. My gay agenda is to get enough sleep, okay? But I have an educative agenda, which is to provide space for teachers and students to think together and to learn together to disrupt that idealized, false, normative value. We shouldn't think of these spaces as neutral or apolitical, because they've never been.
Yeah, and just again, more to speak for teachers, I feel like our entire country has an agenda. Our public school systems are to educate our kids to be smart, intelligent, understand how to make good choices and ask good questions and like learn facts. So that's something we want to like provide them with. We don't want to provide them with alternative facts.
Right, and also I think it's again important to recognize that a large part of a Christian nationalist, specifically, but also generally more conservative, is to actually is to abolish on some level public education, and come up with I mean I think it was Newt Gingrich, or I'm not sure who it was, who said that one of his goals was to abolish public education. Through defunding, through any number of other things, right? And that actually, the notion of a broad-based public space for conversation would not happen.
Again, I think it's important to just recognize that is the deal. That we're all human, and we're coming at our jobs and our profession with our human experiences. Which includes experiences with oppression and experiences with privilege too. So we individually have agendas, and the library's agenda, we all agree as we come to work here that we want the entire public of the Commonwealth to access information that they need and that they want to further their lives and whatever that means to them. So that's the main agenda. And then, as Laura was saying, we're trying to figure out, I think the best way to do that is to start to disrupt some of the commonly held ideas that we have, because that's actually been holding people back. So how do we do that? People should just be aware of that on the outside and on the inside. I think us as professionals sometimes act like we're neutral. We're not. We're not. Again, that helps conversation.
We have just a couple more questions. These two somewhat go together, so I'll share them together. While it makes sense that marginalized communities would prefer own voices regarding their experiences, isn't suggesting a moratorium on others writing about those experiences, especially in fiction, a kind of soft censorship as well? And then the other question is, are there any books that teach or facilitate developing the skill of cross-cultural reading? So there's two parts there.
So I'll take part two first. Okay, no. That was easy. Honestly, there's some people that are working on it. Kim Parker, who's actually local here in the Boston area, just published a book called Literacy as Liberation. Okay, good. Literacy is Liberation. That's Dr. Kim Parker. Fabulous. I think it does the best job of being a tool for teachers to go in and teach the multiplicity of identities through literature, and really understanding the interplay between oppression and privilege, and being very open and honest about it. So I love that book. So that was number two. Does anybody want to take number two? Okay, we're all in agreement. Kim Parker. Okay, good. Number one is an interesting idea, right? And I always find it, so the idea is by, right, again, I'm not in charge. I can't actually make a moratorium on anything. Like, I now have teen sons. I can't make a moratorium on, like, anything. Okay, I would love to, but I cannot. Although I did successfully ban Axe body spray for my house because I'm allergic, so it was a health issue, right? Can people that are outside a marginalized group write about a marginalized group? Absolutely, 100%. I can't stop you from writing it. I don't want to stop you from writing it. Please write it, okay? Does that mean it has to be published? Nope. Does that mean if you are outside that group, you have to do more work as an author? Now, I will say Lori Halls Anderson is a fabulous writer, and looking at her evolution as a YA author is fascinating. She wrote Speak, which was basically a memoir. And then she went to college, and she went to college as a history major, and she learned how to write history. And she came out and she read Yellow 127, whatever it is, Yellow Fever, and then there's a number. Okay, I'm gonna wait for the librarian's brain to go, okay? We're gonna wait for that, right? And then she wrote Chains, which was about the story of an enslaved young man. She's not a young man, she's not Black, she was never enslaved. It was not her story to tell. But damn, did she do her research, because she was a historian. That is what it requires. It does not require somebody who lives outside of that marginalized identity to sit down and write what they think, to just randomly bring in a diverse character because their book needs color. There's a difference.
Somebody who was kind of like, I lean toward this way. Right, again, I don't have the power to make a moratorium on anything, but I agree. Does it have to be on the shelf? You know, do we have to buy another one of those? You know, can we like mix it up a little bit is one thing I would say. But in addition to the cross-cultural learning, James Baldwin said it, you know, you just read. That's how you learn what human life is like. And we know it's possible because a lot of folks from marginalized identities have had to do that to kind of conceptualize their own lives when we didn't have enough stories about ourselves. So it's possible to do that. Of course, don't only just read, but reading does help.
I just want to add one thing, and it's a cure, and it goes back to the gatekeeping question as well, that there's a group called Lambda Literary Awards, right? And they give out awards for best LGBTQ books every year, and in a proliferation of endless categories now. Like there's an award for bisexual young YA romance and bisexual crime novels, right? And over the years, I would say over the past 10, 15 years, more and more non-queer identified people, particularly women, are writing more, particularly YA books and children's books, and they win awards from Lambda. And there are plenty of, this has never been brought to a vote for the Lambda people, but because I'm in the community and hear things different ways, there are plenty of openly queer writers who complain bitterly every time a married woman writes a perfectly good book and wins the award, right? So another gatekeeping function is actually people who give awards, because it helps sales of the books and it helps promotion for the book, right? But you know, the Lambda regulations call for the best book about. And you know, when questioned, they would probably say, well, we don't know about somebody's private life, even though ostensibly they look not queer. So I think for them it's a complicated question. I mean, for me it's not. I don't think they should get the award, but it's a complicated question for them.
I think the complication is where the conversation is.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that we've published some books that are not that are not their own voices, and some of them I am very, very proud of, and very glad that we did publish those books. So it's hard for me to say. It's always a conversation. There's always a continuum. I think I can think of books that are just, it would have been great if somebody else had written it, but I'm glad that book's out there in the world for the kids that are getting to read it.
I think for me as an educator, I made the choice 6 or 7 years ago to only teach Own Voices texts. So in all my children's literature courses, I only teach Own Voices texts. And my colleagues had a similar sort of question for me. Well, aren't you gatekeeping? Aren't you, censoring? Aren't you doing this? I'm like, I don't think the rules are the same. I think that's an exercise in whataboutism, right? You cannot say that the playing field of publishing is the same for marginalized authors. Marginalized authors have to be exceptional, not good. They must be absolutely, astoundingly exceptional. It's why they win a lot of awards, in order to make it through, right? There are some pretty bland books written by privileged folk about privileged lives. There aren't a lot of bland books written by marginalized authors because they don't make it through the gatekeeping, right? Again, you get somebody else up here, they're going to have a different answer.
Thank you for that. We just have one more question. And this one is about lists of banned books. Do libraries such as the BPL or the Minuteman Network, or maybe publishers, do we track and publicize which books are banned and identify where they can be borrowed?
Yes. The American Library Association has a list, and it tracks what books are being banned. I think, what is it this year? There's been a 60% rise or something like this of books being banned. So they follow cases around the country. They make lists, and there's also kind of like a holiday for us called Banned Books Week in late September. And schools are really good at this, but public libraries do this too. That's when all the lists of the banned books come out, encouragement to read and discuss XY book, So that is definitely a feature of ours, and we love it, or I love it.
Candlewick tracks its own banned books and kind of keeps it on top of things. PEN America recently created a book that was a list of just the last year. And indeed, a group of children's publishers has put together, with teachingbooks.net, a page for banned books that includes all the resources. So basically, if a publisher's had a book banned, they submit the book to teachingbooks.net, and then, which already is keeping resources linked to that book. So it helps a teacher go and find that information on, this has a starred review from School Library Journal, and this won these awards, and it has this teaching guide, and it, the goal is to provide resources to people perhaps confronting a ban or challenge.
And I would just say that, well, I think that, well, fabulous and great. I think that actually defending a banned book because it won an award, or because it had 2 stars, or because it was featured in the Horn Book, right, is great, but that there are actually plenty of books that are banned that are actually not particularly very good books. And we have to defend those as well, right? Sure. And that to fall back on, these are the exceptional books and it shouldn't be banned, leaves the door open for actually banning the sort of mediocre YA novel, written by a gay man about 2 boys who fall in love in high school, that really is sort of pulpy romance, and that should also be defended.
Absolutely.
And it's never going to get an award because it's actually not very good.
That is true. This is a resource more for helping teachers, but you're absolutely right.
Right, and I am a big fan of pulpy crap, just putting that out there. I want to say, I think the conversation around banned and challenged books is an important one for us to have. I think it's incredibly important for voices like ours. The ALA keeps this fabulous list. Just look, Amazon, I think now has, although please don't buy anything on Amazon. Jeff Bezos doesn't need your dollars. Right, so you can go there and use it as a resource. They have like banned books, so you can look at, don't buy it there, go to your independent bookstore. And the other thing that's really important is that when we take a book out of a classroom, when we take a book out of the curriculum, what it communicates to the children and the students and the parents of those students is that life experience, that narrative is not worthy of study, right? I was something like 49 years old before I read a book featuring a Latina lesbian, right? That's ridiculous, right? And what that communicated was that my life, my experience, was not worthy of study. I love having lots of books for kids to free read and take out, and I love the fact that they can walk in and you can get 75 books. I love that. But I think it's incredibly important that they bring these books into the classroom and into the curriculum, which is why I love teaching, teachingbooks.org, because that work is how do teachers bring it into the curriculum.
.net.
Oh, sorry, .net, not org. Teachingbooks.net. Thank you.
Also, I think, obviously this all relates back to Florida and Don't Say Gay and the Don't Say Gay bills that are proliferating across the country, right? But on a sort of psychoanalytic level, right, the Don't Say Gay bills are simply a fantasy to wish LGBTQ people away. The bans on critical race theory is simply, by which they mean anything about race, since obviously only people at Harvard Law School really study critical race theory, right, or in graduate seminars, right? And it's just a massive paranoid fantasy that wishes that if you don't say gay, then gay people don't exist.
Gay.
So true. Also, I just want to say there are a lot of organizations that are working against censorship, one of which is also the National Coalition Against Censorship, and I'm not sure whether they have a list, but they have resources for teachers and librarians on how to combat a challenge if they are confronted by it. And a lot of it is, I think one of the best is getting together a committee that is based in your community to defend those, to discuss the book, to really understand why the book is in a collection or in a classroom.
Okay, I think we're out of time. Thank you for your time and sharing this with us. And if you have this on a recording, I hope that you're Googling everything we talked about. Have a good morning.